Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you. I'm V, the Director of Impact here at the James Beard Foundation. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Demystifying Government Relief. Also on the webinar with me today is the Law Office of Arnold Porter. We've got 7 of, we think, the best lawyers around who are going to guide you through all of the changes with the government programs as they relate specifically to unemployment and SNAP and food recovery. Before we did the broadcast today, we got a lot of questions. Many of them will be answered on this webinar. Things that we're not going to be able to get into today, but we will have a webinar next week and the week following, is the PPP, SBA, and CARE loans. With only 40 minutes, we only have so much time. So today we'll focus very deep dive on unemployment, what that means for you, for your employees, how to explain the process to folks, what the new extensions are, and a little bit on SNAP and food recovery. So even if you didn't qualify before, you may now. And we'll do a follow-up on SNAP next week as well. So consider today a great opportunity to learn every single thing you ever hope to know about unemployment and a broad overview of some of the food recovery programs. And we'll get into more details on the PPP and loans next week. I also want to say that what we're trying to do with the industry sessions here is really give you a layman's terms, very easy, just as if you had a best friend who was a lawyer who could walk you through personally what's going on out there in the world. And while they put a ton of effort and research into what they're going to present today, it's not to be in lieu of you seeking your own counsel or finding out what is available in your state or keeping abreast of how things can change tomorrow. We just want this to be a casual peer-to-peer conversation where we're taking the scary out of what's going on and trying to clear the fog a little bit for folks. So keep that in mind as we're going through. You know, our motto this year at James Beard has been good food for good. And as we watch the industry struggle to try and reset where we show up in the world and how we take care of each other, that motto is more important than ever. And you'll see us trying to chase new pathways to be supportive to you. If you have any ideas on a webinar or a way that we can better show up for you, please let us know at impact@jamesbeard.org. For our relief programs and updates on things like the fund and what's happening with policy, you can go to jamesbeard.org/relief. That page is updated sometimes 2-3 times in a day. So it's a great space to get information on exactly what's happening in the hospitality industry and try to clear a little of the fog away from everybody talking about everything. I'm going to introduce you now to Emily Rothkrug from the team, who's going to talk a little bit about how you could interact with us on this webinar, because we do want it to be a conversation. So Emily, share with us how people can interact.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Just a couple of rules of the road. We are recording this webinar. We will send out the link to everybody via email. If you registered, you'll be receiving that link along with some other resources and notes that we're taking kind of throughout the webinar. So don't worry about that. Don't worry about taking notes unless you really want to. We'll be sending all of that stuff out. We are saving questions for the end, but we encourage you, if something comes up, if you need something clarified, if you don't understand what somebody says, you can just submit it using the questions function on the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you can't find that, just send us a note, let us know, and we will help out with that. And feel free to send questions throughout the webinar, and we can try to get those answered for you. If you're having technical difficulties, if you can't hear, you can't see somebody's shared screen, something like that, send us a message using the chat function. It should be sitting right underneath that question function, and you can send us a quick note through there, and we'll try to help you troubleshoot that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to V.
Great, thanks so much, Emily. And also on the call today, we have the Vice President of Impact, Kathryn Miller, who you guys are, most of you are probably getting 2 emails, if not more, a day from. Kathryn will be auditing this webinar and sort of weaving that together with the other work that we're doing in advocacy, and is working with the Arnold Porter folks on a myriad of other spaces as well. So note that this is all coming together in one cohesive way so that we can, again, give you the most direct, most impactful, most relevant information to the hospitality industry and make sure those messages are really, really streamlined so as to not add any additional confusion to that. So our first presenter today is going to be Dan Cantor. We'll be hearing from a number of folks on the team, but Dan is up first, and Emily's just going to pass controls over to his team so that he can take us through, what is unemployment, what is the programs, what are the changes, and a little bit about how we can better understand that.
Terrific. Thanks very much, V. First and foremost, I hope everyone is safe and healthy today. I know we're all experiencing really unprecedented times. We wanted to welcome you to our presentation this afternoon, which, as V mentioned, is really focused on talking in plain terms about the type of government benefits that are available to workers in the restaurant and hospitality industry. We recognize that in addition to the incredible health challenges that are being faced around the world, that there's an incredible amount of economic disruption that is occurring globally, and that the restaurant industry is feeling that as hard, if not harder, than many of the industries. And again, we've tried today to try to boil down some of the basic information that we hope will be helpful to workers in the industry to navigate what could otherwise be some pretty complicated programs. And there may be some that we talk about today that folks want to think about suggesting to their employees as well. What we're really today, before we get started, we thought we'd just do a real quick introduction just so you know who we are. We're going to just spend 1 minute on this because the important part is talking about the substance today. I'm a lawyer in our Washington, D.C. office. I do commercial litigation and crisis management, and I also chair our pro bono program globally for our firm. And over the last month, we've been really focused in our pro bono work on particularly assisting restaurant workers with benefits and other programs. I would ask if just quickly, Rebecca, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Hi, I'm Rebecca Gordon. I'm a counsel in the DC office. I generally do tax and trust and estate litigation, some investigations, and I love to do pro bono work as well. And this is we're happy to be helping you with this. Not happy about the circumstance, obviously, but happy to be here to help you.
Great, thank you. Kathleen?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Wechter. I'm an employee benefits and compensation lawyer in our New York office. And so I'll be talking some about some of the employee benefit issues involved here. Good to be with you all.
Thank you. Kathryn?
We are having. Hi, I am Kathryn, and I am in our Chicago, Illinois office. I'm an associate. I work with Kathleen in employee benefits and executive compensation work, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Josh?
Hello. I don't think you can see me, so I'm just a disembodied voice right now, but I am counsel in our Washington, D.C. office. I practice labor and employment law. I'm not going to be presenting, but I'll be available for questions as they relate to sort of more general employment law issues if they come up, or certainly offline. Thanks.
Terrific. And Jim?
Hi, I'm Jim Joseph, and I'm a tax lawyer in our Washington, D.C. office. I'm the head of our tax group. Also, I'm not going to be speaking, but we'll be available for questions as we go along.
Well, thanks to everyone. And again, we just wanted everyone participating today to just know a little bit about the folks who will be speaking here. So you probably see up on your screen just the way we've broken down our agenda today. We've tried to break it into 3 buckets. First, talking about traditional state if we could go back to the agenda, great. The first, talking about traditional state unemployment benefits. Then we're going to talk about the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, what many folks have probably heard referred to as the CARES Act, which in many ways supplements and adds to these state unemployment benefits programs, and then also provides some additional specific benefits. And so we'll be talking about those. And then we're also going to spend a little time talking about some other government programs as well, including the SNAP program that provides money for food products, some programs for families, and some programs for women and children, as well as some health programs as well. And so that people have just a sense of the overall kind of landscape of the different programs that are out there. In a minute, we're going to just jump into the unemployment benefits. But before we do, and V touched on this a bit at the beginning, but 2 things just to keep in mind here. One is, because we understand that there are folks from throughout the country on the phone today, we're going to try to keep our conversation at a fairly high level of commonalities between a lot of these programs. But it's important to remember that almost all of them are run at the state level, and each state may have its own requirements. And so hopefully today we'll give you a guidepost for these programs, but that anyone applying for a specific program really needs to look at their state's specific requirements. The other thing, and this will be a bit of a mantra today, but it's really important, is that all of what we're talking about today is very, very fluid. There was just a large piece of congressional legislation, the CARES Act bill passed, and the states haven't even had time yet to figure out how to implement it. They all have to update their computer systems. They have to come up with new guidance for how these are going to work. And so much of what we're talking about today is what everyone thinks is going to happen based on what Congress passed last week. But if you go to, for example, some of the states' websites right now, they're going to say, please be patient with us. We're working through this and we'll be back to you soon with guidance. And so it's just important to know that things are going to be updated, and what we say today may be overtaken as new guidance comes on board. So let's just jump into some of the common, let's start with state unemployment programs and some of the common features of state benefits programs. So in general, unemployment programs are administered at the state level. Each state has its own program and its own rules. And while there are some differences among these state programs, there are a whole lot of similarities, and that's what we want to try to focus on today, just to give an overall understanding. In most state unemployment programs, probably all of them in fact, the applicant has to be unemployed through no fault of their own. And we're going to talk about in a little bit what it means to be unemployed in the pandemic world. The circumstances that many restaurant workers are facing kind of don't line up with all of the traditional notions of what it means to be unemployed. So we'll talk about in a little while kind of the specific circumstances that a worker may find themselves in and whether they would or would not qualify for a program. If you've touched at all on unemployment programs, you've probably heard this concept that's called a base period. And that's the way that unemployment programs calculate what a worker is entitled to. And it can differ between each state, but in most cases, the state unemployment programs, they are looking backwards in time. And they're traditionally looking back for 4 or 5 calendar quarters and looking at what the worker earned in those past calendar quarters. And it's those earnings that are going to determine what the worker is entitled to now when they're unemployed. And typically they'll get a percentage of their past weekly earnings. And in a lot of cases, the worker will have had to have a certain minimum amount of work history during this base period in order to qualify. And we'll talk about that in a little more in a little while too. How much anyone is entitled to in any given state program really varies by state. All of the states have what's called a cap or a maximum so that someone cannot get more than X amount in a given week. And there's a really wide spread between the states. Some states are as low as $250 per week in their traditional program, and there are some states that are above $700. And you see a wide range in between the states. Historically, a lot of the states have had some requirements that you have to wait until after your first week of unemployment in order to be able to qualify. And we're going to talk about how that's changing in the new rules that are coming out during the pandemic. And many states have had requirements that the unemployed worker keep looking for work. And we've gotten a lot of questions from workers of how am I supposed to do that in this current situation where there is no work? And we'll talk about some states have completely done away with those requirements for the time being. Some states have kind of gotten away, but not completely with those requirements, and yet others still have those requirements, and it's taking some time to figure out exactly what those mean. And also historically, the state unemployment programs have not covered independent contractors, self-employed individuals, and those in the sharing or gig worker economy. And we're going to talk about in a little while how the new federal legislation has filled some of those gaps. And we'll also talk about the challenges that still remain for undocumented workers, notwithstanding all of the new benefits that have passed. One other common feature that I think it's just important for anyone receiving benefits to remember is that unemployment benefits are taxable, and there will be a tax consequence for them. And so when folks are doing economic planning around the benefits they're receiving, they should keep that in mind. If we could go on to the next slide, please. So I tried to set up for you just for a moment what the world looked like in unemployment programs before the current crisis that we're in. And what has rapidly become clear over the last several weeks is that what I'll call the traditional day-to-day state unemployment programs were just insufficient to handle both the level of claims that were coming through and the nature of claims that were coming through. And many states on their own, together with the federal government through the recent CARES Act, have taken steps to expand what's now available through these unemployment programs. And if you read the law on these, you'll see a bunch of complicated provisions that it's kind of interweaving the states and the federal government and who gets what and the like. We've tried, though, for today to just try to boil it down to the common sense outcome. So what's now available, given all the things that have happened with the state changes and the federal congressional changes. So let us just walk you through a couple of those. Traditionally, again, most states limited unemployment benefits to up to 26 weeks. As a result of the CARES Act, benefits are now going to be available for up to 39 weeks. So we are seeing 13 additional weeks of benefits that have now become available. Very importantly, for those receiving benefits, I had talked before about the state's cap on weekly benefits, that range of somewhere in the $200 per week to up to $700 a week, depending upon what state you're in. Well, as a result of what Congress just did, those who qualify for unemployment now will get an additional $600 on top per week of what they otherwise would qualify for under the state program. So just to give you an example, if you're an unemployed worker who would qualify for, here in Washington, D.C., would qualify for $350 a week under the District of Columbia program, once this actually gets implemented, the CARES Act gets implemented, you would now get $950 per week under that program. And because you'll add the $600 onto the other benefits that you were otherwise entitled to. It's important to note that that $600 add-on right now is only available through July 31 of 2020. We'll have to see if depending upon how long this crisis lasts, whether that might be continued. But under the law that was just passed, that $600 add-on is only available through July. But nonetheless, it's a very significant benefit, additional benefit based on what folks would otherwise receive. Important to note that these additional benefits do not impact certain of the other benefits programs that are available. For example, the money that one would be receiving for unemployment does not impact their ability for health insurance like Medicaid or CHIP that we'll talk about. But it does impact your qualifications for certain other federal programs. So it depends upon the program. Who's covered by these? Who's entitled to these increased benefits? As I talked about before, typical unemployment programs didn't traditionally cover independent contractors or the self-employed. But as a result of the CARES Act, benefits are now going to be available both to independent contractors and self-employed, as well as employees. So we're seeing a sizable increase in in who's covered under these programs. And then in addition, depending upon the state and where one's located, we're seeing a real loosening up, and I had mentioned this before, of some of the requirements about how much work you had to have in the past in order to qualify, and whether you still have to search for new work. And we'll talk about that a little more in a little while, but it really depends upon the state. But just because one couldn't qualify before, because they didn't have enough work history, in some states now they will be able to qualify. So that's just a further expansion of who may be entitled to these benefits. And we're also seeing in a lot of places the programs getting rid of what was called the 1 week waiting period, where it used to be that you weren't entitled to compensation for your first week of unemployment. And we're seeing a lot of states also take down that requirement. And finally, in terms of the expansion, we're seeing that certain benefits that are coming out may be retroactive to January 27th. And what that means is that even if the claim were being made now for certain of those benefits, one might be able to get that compensation going back in time. It's going to depend on the particular benefit that we're talking about. If we could move on to the next slide, that would be great. And so I mentioned a little earlier that one of the requirements for unemployment programs is that you have to be unemployed. And that may seem obvious, but it raises all kinds of questions of what does that mean with regard to all of the upheaval that any individual worker is facing in this current crisis that we're in. If the worker themselves has the COVID virus, Maybe they have to stay home and care for someone in their family who has the COVID virus. Maybe they have a kid out of school and can't get to work. And then I know for a lot in the restaurant industry right now and in many other industries, folks simply don't have hours, or if they do have any hours, they're greatly reduced hours. And for the most part, and one has to look at each specific state program, but for the most part, we're seeing the states greatly increasing and covering those situations that I was just talking about, as does the federal legislation. And again, one really has to look at the specifics of the state. But what we're seeing is on a government level, the government recognizing that there are just a whole bunch of different difficult situations that individual workers are finding themselves in, and have been trying to expand the law to cover as many of those situations as possible. For the most part, someone who just voluntarily leaves their work or is fired for misconduct would not be covered. And I say for the most part because there are some provisions dealing with folks who have a credible fear that they would be exposed if they were going into work. And that's a very specific situation that one would have to look at the situation. But I think the main takeaway is that we see the government programs looking expansively of who will qualify for benefits. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So I think at this point, Dee, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything here, but my colleague Kathryn will be picking up on our discussion about unemployment benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Dan. That was very helpful indeed. And what I heard is, the way that the programs were set up before, the new CARES Act has affected, who is eligible, including people who maybe have to leave because they have school-age children, people who are infected, people who are afraid of contracting the virus. Obviously, that'd be harder to prove. They're giving more weeks, and it seems like we still are waiting to hear entirely. It does feel like it's probably in people's best interest to be applying for unemployment right now, but that's, we're still up in the air as it relates to, will it be retroactive? We don't know just yet. Will the 1 week waiting period still be a thing? Seems state to state. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about Medicaid and CHIP and whatnot, so I'll wait for that. One question that came in while we were on that piece of the call is, if folks are a server or a sous chef or something and they qualify for unemployment and they also qualify for the additional $600, they will be making more money than they did as workers. Is that demotivational to coming back to work if the restaurants were to reopen before the July 31st time, or is there any thought you have around that?
So the question is accurate that in fact the benefit amount for some individuals may exceed what they actually earned before, and that was a debate for those who were following the news that Congress was having about where to set the benefit levels. But there was a ultimate decision to set at those levels, I think, for among other reasons, to try to get to make sure that workers had sufficient funds to weather the crisis, and B, to help put additional funds into the economy. But there has been some robust debate around that issue.
That makes sense, though. You want to be able to cover your bills and potentially put more money into the economy. That makes sense. Okay, thank you for answering that. And then just keeping in mind that these benefits will be taxed. At some point, there will be a tax penalty. All unemployment benefits will be taxed. So keeping that in mind as folks are making their decisions. Kathryn, do you want to take over from here and tell us a little bit more?
Yes, absolutely. So as Dan previously mentioned, applying for unemployment insurance benefits really is a state-specific process. However, we want to provide a few general pieces of advice on how workers apply for unemployment insurance benefits. So generally speaking, one of the first things workers should do is go to the Department of Labor or unemployment insurance website for their state. Most states have really helpful and detailed guides which provide information on when and how to apply for unemployment insurance. In addition, most states have now added to their websites pages specific to the coronavirus pandemic. So some of the changes in state law that Dan had been discussing, those are often spelled out fairly clearly for employees and workers so that they can see, how does this apply to me in my state? Most state websites also will allow you to file a claim for unemployment insurance benefits online. In some states, you can also apply over the phone, and you may submit hard copy applications. But at this point, most states really are encouraging people to apply online. That's because obviously the states are working their hardest to get benefits to folks as quickly as they can, and it really is quicker to apply online. Next slide, please. So because of the coronavirus, there are an unprecedented number of unemployment insurance claims that are being filed right now with states. And as a result, even though state unemployment insurance programs are really working their hardest to adjust to the high number of claims, some workers are experiencing some difficulties in applying for benefits. So we've often heard about workers that are experiencing glitches when they go to file their claims online, or that have had very long wait times when they call over the phone. One of the biggest concerns that this causes is that it prevents workers from getting the benefits as quickly as they can. So one of the biggest and most important tips for workers right now is that they should document all of their attempts to file a claim. For telephone calls, workers should document when they called, how long they waited, and the names of any person that they talked to. And for online applications, workers should, if they can, take screenshots at each step of the application process, because documenting this process may be key later on to receiving benefits dating back to when they first attempted to file claims. So it really provides them with some background that they can hopefully receive benefits. One other thing that it's really important to note, if you can go back to the prior slide, one important thing to note at this point is, as Dan mentioned, and as we're going to keep reiterating, this really is a rapidly changing area. States are working to implement new provisions of the CARES Act. States are even working to implement changes to their temporary changes to their own state requirements. And so some states are further along in the process of adapting than others. And so states, some of them have posted notices on their websites telling workers exactly how the CARES Act will be implemented. New York is a good example. They have some very good and helpful guidance on their website. Other states, such as California, have said essentially we're waiting on further guidance and have provided workers with guidance on how they should handle that. Next slide. So then in addition to those general tips, we wanted to just highlight a few key practical tips for workers in New York, DC, and California. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive guideline for each state. This is just a few key things workers should know. So in New York, in order to address the high volume of claims, the state now requires that workers file claims on certain dates based on the first letter of their last name. So from Monday through Wednesday, workers should apply based on their first letter of their last name on their assigned date. And then Thursday through Saturday, anyone can apply. Another key thing to note, especially for the online application process, is that it currently requires workers to call a specialist over the phone to finalize the application. So that's another issue where you really, if you can apply on your set day, you really want to do that, because it is designed to space out the applications to make it so that the call volume and the online volume is a bit more manageable so that folks can get through better. One thing that Dan had mentioned is that states have really different treatment of how they're handling requirements to search for work. New York, notably, has not waived the requirement for workers to be actively searching for work. So during the application process, that is something that workers in New York will be asked about. In Washington, DC, on the other hand, unlike in New York, the work search requirement has been waived for workers who are unemployed as a result of the coronavirus. However, this is one of those issues where the technology hasn't quite caught up with the policy yet, And there's currently, last we heard, there was a glitch in the system, and the online application process is still rejecting workers who don't provide work search information. Last we heard that the DC Office of Employment Services is still working to correct that issue. California has not waived its search work requirements generally, but it has provided some limited exceptions, including if the worker plans to return to work with the same employer. So that's an issue where you really need to check with the state website to see what the requirements are, because as of right now, there are some limited exceptions, but generally the requirements still apply. And then another key thing to know for California is that unemployment benefits may be paid prior to any final eligibility determination with respect to whether the claimant is able to work or available to work. So many states at this point are advising, to the extent you can, if you know you're eligible for benefits or you believe you're eligible for benefits, really try to get your application in as soon as you can.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That was, again, very, very thoughtful and thorough. So what I heard is document all of your attempts to file. If it's a phone call, get when you called, the wait time, the name of the operator. If you don't get an operator, maybe take a screenshot of your phone, the time that you tried to call, how many times you tried to call, and each step of the process online, take a full screenshot so it shows the date, it shows the times, it shows each step that you're going through. That's a great tip. These things are state specific, so you want to go to your state website to get the most updated information, and they're not being shy about what's going on with COVID. You should get a little pop-up there that'll be very clear what their policy is. And then, that the tech is still catching up with the policy. So understanding that this is frustrating for everyone and everyone's in the same boat. So it's not that you're doing it wrong or you're going to miss out. Everyone's, in the same place, but by documenting your attempts, you have a better chance of getting potential, benefits from the times that you were trying, maybe. Better chance, not a promise. Thank you for that. One other question that we had that came in was, we're talking a lot about how this applies to employees. Some restaurants do, some don't, but if you are on your restaurant's payroll and you have had to close your restaurant, are you eligible for unemployment as an employee of your own business, or is it different?
So I'm going to open that up to the group to see if anyone has any thoughts on that.
And we can save that one for the end if it wasn't, well, why don't we save that one for the end when we do all the questions? I'll mark that down here so you guys can think about it for just a minute. So up next, we have Kathleen, who is going to be taking us through a little bit more. Kathleen.
Thanks, Kathryn. I'm going to talk about a couple of other ways in which employees and their families may be entitled to get money right now. Obviously, this is a difficult time for so many people, and the unemployment part is extremely helpful, but there are two other ways in which there may be access to funds, perhaps sooner rather than later, which can help out in a crisis. One thing that the CARES Act did was to provide for payments from the federal government to individuals who make less than a specified amount. And this is a payment that they don't have to apply for. It's going to be an automatic payment from the government to the individual. It's a tax program, so it's complicated, but to simplify it, the payment would be $1,200 to an individual who reported income of up to $75,000, or in the case of joint filers, payments of $2,400 for joint filers who reported income of up to $150,000. That amount increases by $500 for each child under the age of 17, so it goes up for larger families. The credit is phased out so that to take an easy example, an individual with no children, they would not receive anything if their reported income had been $99,000 or higher. So for joint filers with no children, receive nothing if the joint income was more than $198,000. The interesting thing about this is the amount of the payment and the eligibility to the payment is determined based on your 2019 tax return if you filed one, if you didn't file one, it would be based on your 2018 tax return. Obviously, this crisis hit right in the middle of tax filing season. Some people have filed, a lot of people have not. But when people are thinking, how much can I expect? You'd look back to your most recently filed of those two tax returns. And as I said, this doesn't have to be applied for. You don't have to fill out a form. The government is just going to pay it. For individuals who actually have their direct deposit information on file with the IRS, if you've paid your taxes electronically or gotten a refund, the amount will come through right to your bank account as a direct deposit. And we've heard from the government that they're expecting to do that in about 3 weeks. If it's not direct deposit, it's obviously going to take longer. It will be done by check. And that will obviously you can think of a lot of complicated situations in which people's bank accounts may have been closed, someone may have moved. And the government and the IRS has said that they are still in the process of figuring all that out. And they've actually asked people not to call them and ask about their own specific return. I'm sure the lines are jammed, as with the unemployment lines. But that is the plan. So optimally, someone could see a check for, any of these amounts coming through in 2 to 3 weeks.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. And to clarify, a person who is unemployed could potentially apply for unemployment, let's say in the state of New York, get the maximum, the $504, right? They could also get the additional $600 from the CARES Act, and they could also get this additional check, or is there some balance between those things?
This is an automatic check. This is a stimulus check.
Okay.
That's right. And you'll sometimes hear this referred to as the stimulus payments. The idea being, as Dan mentioned before, the government wants to get money in the hands of people so they can start spending it. So it helps the taxpayer and helps the economy as well. An important thing to note is that this CARES Act benefit is not available to non-resident aliens. So that is an important
for U.S.
thing.
citizens only.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is actually in the world of what I do, is this is a big change for the IRS and the government, because what they are letting people affected by the crisis do is tap into their own retirement benefits. So typically, for anyone who has a 401k plan or an individual retirement account, you'll know that it's difficult to get your money out once you put it in. The idea is that, as we all know, you want to keep that money until you retire. So there's a lot of bells and whistles and limitations on getting money out. The CARES Act is allowing people who've been affected by the coronavirus crisis to get their money out, either in the form of a distribution, an early distribution, or in the form of a loan. So who can take advantage of this? Generally, if you, the plan participant, spouse, dependent, has been tested positive for coronavirus, you could take advantage of this. And then there's also a separate category if you've had adverse financial impact because of a reduction of hours, termination, furlough, you had to leave your job to take care of your children because of the coronavirus. Basically, a group of circumstances that I think will, in many cases, apply to people in the restaurant industry. And the way it works is you could take an early withdrawal of up to $100,000 from your own account. So it's up to $100,000, but only as much as you actually have in your account, from either an IRA or a 401k plan. If the plan and the IRA permitted that, a lot of employers are going ahead and making those changes right now. And that would not be subject to the usual 10% excise tax that the government usually takes in this case.
Good.
What is a really nice feature about this is the employee can choose to pay it back over a 3-year period. So let's say somebody takes it out, things pick up, they find themselves with enough money to put back in. they can put the money back into their plan and really re-up their retirement plan. So it gives them a chance to do this in an emergency, but also put it back in. If they don't choose to put it back in, they'd be taxed on it over a 3-year period, unless they want to be taxed on it in the year they take the distribution. So this can be a way for people to help themselves through their retirement plan assets. And then additionally, there is a increase in the amount of money you can borrow from your own plan, your own account in the plan, and people can take out up to $100,000 of their own plan money if they have it, and that's permitted within the next 6-month period. So that's a real change in retirement policy that I think may be almost act as an emergency fund for some people. Obviously takes a lot of thinking about.
Yeah. So what I heard here is, you know, these checks, you could get them all. Potentially, some people will get them all. You want the direct deposits are likely coming in 3 weeks. A check might be longer. It is for U.S. citizens only. Can we just clarify? Is that the stimulus check is only for U.S. residents, or unemployment benefits not available to Visa or green card holders?
You know, I'm only talking to the stimulus check, but I think maybe if we save that for the end,
All right, we'll save that for the end.
we can talk with Dan about that as well.
Cool. Think about that for the end.
This is Jim. The stimulus check is available to resident aliens and green card holders. It's just non-resident aliens, you know, quote unquote illegal. People who are working in the country illegally cannot get it.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's very helpful to folks. And we do only have 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure. Thank you very much, Kathleen, for that. That was very informative and helpful, and I feel like I'm getting more hopeful as we're going along, and I hope that other people are feeling the same way. And I know we've got a couple of questions to get to and a few more slides, so I want to bring Rebecca back to talk a little bit more about the SNAP programs, which again, we will be doing an in-depth more follow-up on this particular topic next Wednesday with Ellen from FRAC. So Rebecca's going to give you the high level, and then if you have more questions, we will likely address those questions next week. So Rebecca, thank you so much.
Hi, so I'm going to share my screen and talk about SNAP and just give a very, I know we don't have much time left, so I'm just going to give a very high level overview of some of these other types of benefits that may be available, including SNAP, TANF, WIC, and Medicaid. This will be, you know, a 5-minute overview, so we have time for to get to the questions as well. One big takeaway with these programs that's really important for everyone to understand is that these programs are federal programs, but they're administered at the state level, and there's a very wide variance between how they're administered at the state level, including eligibility and available benefits. So it's really critical for whomever is trying to access these programs to look into the state specifics, the websites for their states about the eligibility and benefits in those states. Also, you know, part of the eligibility requirement for all of them is income. And so it's, you know, we've been talking a lot about these unemployment and CARES Act benefits. And because those may count towards the income eligibility for some of these benefits, you need to keep that in mind, because it may actually, you know, tap you out of eligibility for some of these relief programs. And so it's an art, not a science, in terms of looking at your eligibility for unemployment. You obviously automatically get the stimulus check, as Kathleen just talked about, and then looking at what that brings you to in terms of your income level and whether that may impact your eligibility for some of these other programs, and when it may actually impact whether you want to apply for unemployment before or after SNAP. It's kind of like an art, or it's not, it's, you know, there might be an art to it in terms of thinking about when you apply for certain benefits and looking at the eligibility tests. So really quickly with SNAP, you know, a lot of people may think of SNAP as, it used to be called the food stamp program. So it's food stamps. It's a program that provides, you know, vouchers or ATM type cards to purchase groceries. It can't be used to purchase non-food items. And the benefit amount is based on household size and income. And this program is, as I just mentioned, it depends on current monthly finances, and the unemployment benefits that we've been talking about and the stimulus checks do count towards your monthly income amount. So if you're getting these weekly unemployment benefits, that, like as V had mentioned, if you're eligible for $500, depending on your state, and then you have this extra $600 because of the CARES Act, that's $1,100 a week, which may count you out because the income threshold for SNAP is likely to be a lot less than that, the monthly income threshold, unfortunately. If you are eligible and you apply, the eligibility interviews obviously now are going to be conducted online or by phone, and you'll be approved and receive benefits back to the date you apply, which is very helpful. And it may be that if you have someone in your house that's met eligibility requirements for one of the other programs we're going to talk about, like TANF or another eligibility program, that you could be considered like de facto eligible for SNAP. So that's useful to know in terms of these means tested programs. These are federal programs, but then the states decide how to implement them. So again, you should look at how the states are varying how they're implementing them. And so some states are taking advantage of trying to really help their residents in terms of extending certification periods, granting flexibility in terms of eligibility and things like that. So it's really important to just look at what your state is doing to take advantage. So I'm going to move on to these other programs. TANF is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. This is what's traditionally what people have called before welfare. In California, if anybody on the phone is from California, the program there is called CalWorks. Different states may call it different things, but federally it's called TANF. And this program is very flexible. It provides, not just cash, but support services, depending on the state. Those services could be, services not just with money to buy food, but also, housing support, utility support, family support services, credit counseling, and other things for applicants who are pregnant or responsible for a child under the age of 19. And again, the federal government is encouraging states to really be more generous in light of the pandemic and to, make the income thresholds more generous. So it may be the case that with TANF, there may be the ability to access those services, even if you are getting unemployment and the CARES Act benefit. Moving on to WIC, which is the Special Supplemental Nutritional Program for Women, Infants, and Children. This isn't just limited to women. It does provide access to men or adoptive parents that are raising children under the age of 5. And many people might be familiar with food that is stamped with the WIC symbol at the grocery store. Those are the foods that are designated for folks that are have been granted eligibility for the WIC program. It's typically a debit card that you use at a grocery store and the amount on the debit card is based on what the eligibility amount that you're granted. And again, it's state by state. So once you're given, once you meet the eligibility requirements, the amount that you get per month depends on there's eligibility tests depending on income level and other requirements. There's also this nutritional risk assessment that's referenced in the slide. And those used to be done in person, but of course right now, in light of the pandemic, they are doing those by phone or online. So that's incredibly helpful that they're still moving forward with these interviews and granting eligibility to allow people to take advantage of this program. And last, with Medicaid, most people are familiar generally with Medicaid, and it provides free or low cost medical benefits to eligible individuals, including children, pregnant women, and the eligibility again depends on income level and other factors. Your Medicaid eligibility depends on your state of residence. So you're going to want it not like necessarily, you know, there's some other programs or benefits that may depend where you work, but this is where you live. And the states vary widely on eligibility because of the expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. So it's very dependent on individual circumstances and the relevant state where you live in terms of what health option may be the best for you. And that's why it's just like an incredibly complicated concept of what health options you may have if you're losing your health insurance at work. There are other options if you're not eligible for Medicaid. One is CHIP, which has been referenced before in the presentation, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program, which covers medical and dental care for children under the age of 19. And there's also state-specific health and coverage programs for people who aren't eligible for Medicaid. So it's really critical that if you yourself or your workers are in need of medical coverage, to look at what your states offer, because a lot of states offer different health programs, you know, free clinics and things like that to assist, particularly right now.
Great. Thank you so much for that.
That was very quick.
No, it was, but I appreciate it. And what I heard here is that you want to take a look at the full picture of things that are available to you. You know, you may qualify for SNAP or unemployment, but that you can't extreme coupon it and get them all. You have to kind of like choose what's going to be the most value to you, and understand that process. If you are going to apply for SNAP, there is a retroactiveness that kicks in for the applications. You want to weigh your household abilities to say, you know, get a really clear picture of how this is going to work, because you can't have them all, but you can have quite a bit. WIC is not just for women, which is great to hear, and then looking into your state-specific programs as it relates to health insurance and whatnot. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for that. We're going to kick it back to Dan to give us a little wrap-up, and then we'll have maybe a minute or two left for questions. And I do have, we have been getting them, and I've been holding them here. A lot of them are in the similar category, so we will try to get to as many of those as we can, even if we have to go over just a little bit. So Dan, thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, V. Appreciate it. I will take 30 seconds here to wrap up so we leave as much time as possible for questions. You've probably heard before, but many of the state unemployment programs and other benefit programs have been putting up very useful frequently asked question guides and other guidance. So to the extent you or any workers have questions, we recommend you go to the websites for the various agencies. There's some good information out there. We also just wanted to share that our law firm in many places throughout the country, in DC, Maryland, Virginia, New York, California, and Colorado, which are all places we have offices, are running a pro bono program where we are assisting unemployed hospitality industry workers who need help figuring out the various government programs. We can't promise we can help everyone. We'll need to assess each individual circumstances, but we've listed in this WebEx, in the deck document, an email box for the different offices. And if you know someone or want to pass to any of your employees this information, we welcome someone who thinks they need assistance to send a note to one of those mailboxes to give their name and numbers, and we'll have a lawyer call them back and assess, you know, what if we can help at all, and if so, what kind of help. And so we just wanted to share that with everyone. And I'll turn it back to you, V.
Wow, Dan, that is an extremely generous offer. Thank you so much. And for everybody who stayed on to the end of this presentation, I bet you're really glad that you did. You have personal pro bono lawyer in your area if you're in DC, LA, New York, San Francisco, or Denver, I think is the following one there, right? So
Right.
We will be sending out this presentation and those links at the end to everyone who participated. So definitely take advantage of that. And thank you again to the whole office of Arnold Porter for being there for us during this time and really taking time out of your guys' day to give this kind of personal attention. It really goes a long way and means a ton to this community. So we did have a couple questions, and Dan's going to be answer king right now. The one, I think one of the things that a lot of folks were asking is, can you re-clarify for green card and visa holders, they do qualify for unemployment, they do not qualify for the stimulus check, or what is the delineation there?
Sure. So let me take a crack at that, and then I welcome Jim, Josh, or anyone else on the team. Please just jump in, because there are complicated rules here. But for the unemployment programs, you need to be authorized to legally work in the United States. That's the typical rule in all of the programs. So for example, if you had a green card or other type of legal authorization to work, you would be qualified. But if you're here, for example, just overstaying a non-work visa, you would not qualify, or if you were otherwise undocumented. And in the Stimulus Act, there's this concept of it doesn't apply to non-resident aliens, which is a special term. But so people who would qualify are people with Social Security numbers, people with green cards. And I will defer to one of the tax lawyers on the phone, Jim or Kathryn. Are there other categories of folks who might qualify immigration-wise under CARE?
I mean, my understanding is it's green card holders, also known as resident aliens, but they have some sort of legal resident status here in the United States.
Great. Thank you for that. And we'll continue to advise you to check state by state, give it a try and investigate that further as well. But it does, so it sounds like green card holders and folks with Social Security numbers qualify for the stimulus. If you have working papers or a legal worker, you'll qualify for unemployment. And going back to the SNAP thing, you can't have them all. So weigh them all against each other and see which one works best for you. Moving on. Oh, go ahead.
There's just one thing I wanted to add is you should also check for your state that there are some benefits like SNAP and other benefits that in the state, it may say that it's limited to, green card holders or other legal residents, but that they aren't allowed to ask for documentation for unemployment benefits, but for things like SNAP, TANF, WIC. There are some states that in the actual, like if you look on the website, it actually says this, where it'll say that they aren't required to ask for documentation.
Well, that is a very pro tip. So let's reiterating that in some states, they're not allowed to ask for documentation when you're applying for SNAP. So that may be something that folks
not
can get a little bit of
necessarily
help with.
SNAP.
Oh,
I don't want to say that it's just SNAP. I'm saying for certain relief, like certain
relief
types of relief that are state specific, it may say that they're not allowed to ask for documentation.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. So again, go to your state and figure that out and see what's worth a shot. The hottest question throughout this has been, if I am the owner of my business, but I also get a W-2 from my business, I'm the owner and an employee, can I apply for unemployment if I had to close my restaurant or reduce hours?
Let me talk about that for a minute and then invite others on the phone to jump in as well. So the new CARES legislation does cover self-employed. We've been looking for some guidance on exactly what that means. I believe I recently saw at least one state which suggested that if one was a individual owner of a restaurant and had been on payroll, that the state might consider them. But I don't think there's a lot of clarity on that issue, and it's something that one may want to reach out to the state on. But I don't know if Josh, Jim, anyone else on the phone has more direct information on that. I have not seen a lot of guidance on that important question yet.
Yeah, this is Jim. Again, it varies some by state, I would think, and just how they implement it. But it has been my understanding that if you get a W-2 and you are treated as an employee, that then you could qualify. And the problem is more if you are just taking out profits from business and not getting a W-2, then I think you would not qualify for unemployment.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like something we need to get a little more clarity on, and we will dig into and update you guys as we get more clarity on that. But so you're saying under CARES, it's potential that you could qualify for unemployment. It's just not clear yet. But since it takes self-workers.
Correct. There's some language that might be interpreted to permit it, but unfortunately, we're in this period yet where all we have is this legal language. And all of the states that have to decide what it means and how to implement it are just beginning that process. Wish could give more information because I know this is an incredibly important question to probably a lot of people on the phone. But it's something that I think the answers will start developing over the next few weeks on that.
Great. And for everyone on the phone, we will be following this over the next several weeks and include it in our updates at jamesbeard.org/relief. We'll include it in newsletters where it's applicable. We'll include it in future webinars as we're going through, updates. This is changing every week. So every week we're almost doing it over again. The other question that we have time for on this particular call is with the rehiring process. Traditionally, I guess if you were to let somebody go and then you hired them back, there may be some implications of having to pay back their unemployment, or there might be some sort of penalty to employers who rehire their employees. And we were talking that you've heard that the CARES Act and sort of the mentality right now is not to punish employers for rehiring their employees at the end of this. Can you talk a little more on that?
Sure, and it's another important question. So thank you for raising it. The laws that are being passed now, and particularly the CARES Act, are trying to incentivize the rehiring of employees. However, it's not entirely clear how that fits together with some of the traditional rules that you've been talking about. And that's another piece that needs to get some clarity in the next few weeks. And therefore, if one had specific questions on that, I think that the best thing would be to reach out if you can get through on the phone, which I know is a bit of a challenge right now, but to get some additional guidance from the state, because it's one of those situations where it's not clear how all of the pieces fit together. One would hope in this situation that, given that the law is trying to incentivize increased employment, that there wouldn't be penalties, but we need to see how that's all interpreted.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, we'll stay on top of it.
And V, this is Jim. I just wanted to add one other thing. It seems pretty clear that Congress is going to have to do some technical corrections relating to the CARES Act. And so one of the things that I have heard that might need to be corrected is this disconnect where Congress is trying to incentivize rehiring and pre-existing state rules might penalize you for rehiring. And so Congress might try and override some of those penalties to make these things consistent. So if people are finding these kinds of penalties when they're actually going through this, they should, you'll let us know, we'll let our legislative people know, and we'll make sure people keep track of that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. One more question that just came in that we may have to do a follow-up on, but maybe y'all have an idea here is, if someone is a sole member LLC, can they apply for unemployment because they have no work now? But they also are a business owner. Can they apply for the loans and grants that are coming as part of the CARE package, which I know is something we'll have to cover on another webinar, but is it possible that a business owner could qualify for both business interruption, for lack of a better term, loans and grants, and unemployment? Or is it another one of these you can't super coop on it?
Jim, did you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, that is a hard one with the single member LLC, because a single member LLC is actually ignored for tax purposes. So you are treated as an individual owning that business for tax purposes. So if the CARES Act and the Paycheck Protection loans and things follow the tax rules, you wouldn't be eligible to get that. And you would be eligible to get unemployment, because if you're self-employed, you can get unemployment. And so they might treat you as self-employed. So
Got it.
My answer would be that's unclear. My guess is that it's going to be unemployment and not the other stuff, but we need to wait and see. And it would be worth it to apply for the other CARES Act, the PPP and the EIDL, if you're a single member LLC, and just see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's helpful, at least for right now, in clarifying. And we did go over time, so thank you all for giving us extra time today. I think it's been incredibly informative, and I'm so grateful for all the work and care that you guys put into this presentation. And I know I speak for the whole foundation and everyone on the phone when I say we literally could not navigate this without you. We're creators, food and beverage people, and it's folks like you who are really helping us clear the fog and feeding us the information that we need in such a digestible and appetizing way. And we'll pay you that favor back someday when we all get open back up and have a round of drinks together. So We will be continuing the webinars. You can find those online at the jamesbeard.org website. They come out every Friday. We will certainly be doing another follow-up with our friends at Arnold Porter, especially around PPP, the CARES Act, a deep dive like we did today on unemployment. So keep an eye out on that. This recording will be sent to you along with some notes. If you have any additional questions, you can email us at impact@jamesbeard.org, and we'll do our best to try and connect you to a resource. Dan, did you have anything else that you wanted to end with?
No, other than thank you for your time today. And on behalf of all of us at our firm, we wish all of the restaurant community speedy recovery here. You're an incredibly important part of all of our communities. And I know this is a difficult time. So we'll all work together to see that recovery happen quickly.
Absolutely. On our Facebook call yesterday, they said in folks that they surveyed, the #1 thing people want to do when they get out of quarantine is go out to dinner. So we have really high hopes that we'll all be able to do that together very, very soon. Thank you, everyone. Stay well, stay healthy, and stay at home. And we'll see you tomorrow at 2 p.m.